This week, we're recording live from RSA Conference 2020. We're in Broadcast Alley, Moscone West. We're going to do two interview segments today. Our first interview segment is going to be with Rob Gurzeev. He's the CEO at Psycognito, and we're going to talk about shadow risk elimination. In our second segment, we have an analyst, principal analyst from Forrester, Jinan Budge, coming talk about CISO leadership, culture, and the evolving role of the CISO. All that and more on Business Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. With over half of enterprise security budgets going towards detection and response in 2020, the challenge is investing in solutions that can scale, migrate, and adapt with your business. Cloud-native security solutions from ExtraHop are purpose-built to help your team respond to threats across the hybrid attack surface. Everywhere your enterprise exists today and wherever it goes tomorrow, ExtraHop is there to secure it. Learn more at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop.
This is Business Security Weekly, episode number 164. We're recording on February 25th, 2020. We are at RSA Conference, live in Broadcast Alley. Joining me as my co-host is Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Hey, it's good to be here, man.
We're doing the first live BSW show.
I know, it's weird. It doesn't feel like BSW.
I know, it doesn't. It just doesn't. We do it on Mondays. It's
normally
Tuesday.
It's Monday, and it's on a specific set with the...
Right.
Yeah,
but we are recording live. Joining us for this interview segment, Rob Gurzeev, you're the CEO at Psycognito. I have a nice little bio here. I wanted to read quickly because you'll know why I do this in a second.
All right.
You've development of offensive security solutions for both private sector and intelligence agencies. Prior to founding Psycognito, you were director of offensive security and head of R&D at C4 Security, which is acquired by Elbit Systems, which a company I know, and the CTO of the product development of the 8200 Israeli Intelligence Corps. Of course you were. Welcome to Business Security Weekly.
It's a pleasure to be here, guys.
it's nice to have you.
Yes. We had an interesting discussion prior to kind of our prep call. And, I went out to the website and was preparing for this. And I'm a big believer in category definition. Mm-hmm. And I have a really unique way on how I try to help companies build kind of what their category is. In this one, was interesting. You call it shadow risk elimination,
right?
Which I think is an interesting category. But let's break into it first. What do you mean by shadow risk first?
Mm-hmm. So shadow risk is these unknown unknowns in servers, applications, data, all around the place, partners, subsidiaries, and your own assets that attackers can actually see. They may be able to exploit it, yet on the other hand, most security teams are unaware of 100% of their attack surface. We're actually seeing they're aware of 30 to 70% of it. So one of the biggest problems today, if you're investing $50 million in all of these firewalls and endpoint protection solutions, cloud security, you're mostly investing it in 70% tops of what you actually want to protect.
Right. And so what I think you mean by this is there is a lot of external assets that you may not know you have. The marketing team might have spun up a website for some reason, and it's hosted in some obscure place that you don't know about. And they do that on a periodic basis. And what's happening is you have this growth of these assets that are actually tied back to your business, but you don't necessarily know they're there or where they are.
Exactly. I mean, attackers win most of the time when they target large organizations, and not only large organizations, because they're looking for the path of least resistance. So by definition, they will look for that 30 to 70% of the attack surface that is unprotected and unmonitored. And what we're trying to do is to provide the capabilities to the security team to continuously monitor everything that they have and their whole IT ecosystem from the attacker's point of view. And if you can tell the security team what are these 5 or 10 critical attack vectors that attackers will discover, and will exploit as soon as they see them, that's an amazing investment to make.
And I'm surprised how many organizations don't do this. And, I think when you said from an attacker's perspective, that's super important to this discussion, right? Because internally inside the network, right? But on the assets that I have within the walls of my building, there are some, now not everyone does this, but there are some great ways to figure out what you have,
Sure.
right? DHCP, we talked with, Extra Hop and all these other methods looking at logs and broadcast traffic. But when you now look at it from the attacker's perspective,
Right.
you're looking at it's a completely different process. And even just basic things I've found in the past yield great results. So I want to go through the entire domain. I want to do subdomain brute forcing, right? I want to find every host name that could possibly exist.
Right.
I want to visit that website and I want to take a screenshot of it. Like that's always step one usually on a external pen test.
Right.
It's usually step one on a bug bounty program.
Right.
And oftentimes you find exactly what you're talking about, that in those assets, there's something that no one's paying attention to or has no idea it's exposed to the internet.
And it gets even much more complex, because what about this partner that has this Cisco ASA, this gateway, and it has your company logo and your company name in the authentication page, maybe even some of your internal networks names in this nice drop-down list. So attackers can easily find it and maybe exploit it. It may lead to your internal network, yet if you're the average or most security teams, you have no way to know that this company even has any access to your company, to your internal networks. So the problem is, how do you understand what attackers actually see, especially in the modern IT ecosystem where it has exponentially expanded over the last decade?
Yeah, and third-party management is hard enough when we know who our vendors are and we try to put them through a security assessment, because I spent years doing this for one of the large national banks. It's a hard problem. But when you think about fourth and fifth party risk, you're thinking about the outsourcer, the outsourcer, the outsourcer.
Right.
It's very hard for an organization to understand the potential risk posed by a concentration of fourth and fifth party entities, like and Amazon Web Services, right? Because a lot of these services could be hosted in Amazon. So that interrelationship of your third, fourth, fifth party relationships start to show concentration of where are potential weak spots or risk areas that you don't necessarily know because your contract is with this vendor and they're right. So that's a really hard challenge.
Totally. And if you're using the 20 years old data model that port scanners and vulnerability scanners have built over the years, you're really looking at a big, huge list of IP addresses or IP ranges and domain names, but it's really one-dimensional. And what we've learned is that you have to leverage mathematical graphs to be able to draw these connections between this SaaS solution that your third party is using that still has something to do with you. It may have your company logo. It may allow attackers and customers, of course, or partners to connect to some of your data and internal applications. So once you're there, once you see these attack vectors, it's obvious that you have this problem. Yet, if you're only looking at vulnerability scanners, 500 pages PDF reports, you don't really have the ability to understand what attackers see.
So it's almost like you're finding the artifacts of your organization, not necessarily my direct assets,
in
but
many cases,
artifacts that are hanging out.
We are seeing even mainframes that are sometimes exposed and critical databases. But for example, these multi-billion-dollar companies just a week ago had this exposed Confluence solution. It's Atlassian is a huge company, very successful one, and they have misconfigured their Okta solution, another great company. But misconfigurations happen. Now, if you don't have the business context of this is a Confluence server, this data is not supposed to be exposed to the whole internet, then you're not able to process hundreds of thousands, or if not millions, of these kind of instances. And you have to leverage technology.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you? It's interesting because when you spin up SaaS solutions, you often put your company name .atlassian.com, right? And
Right.
every are you searching for those specific
Yes.
things, right?
We're mapping
That's awesome.
logos. We're looking for keywords. We're using NLP to extract these entities.
Yes.
We're able to understand that this subdomain or this string in this SSL certificate means IT department or marketing. And we're able to automatically classify assets to these business units or these subsidiaries, and then assign a security grade to these sub-organizations, and not only to the organization as a whole.
That's really so. How do you do how do you know what AWS infrastructure someone may have spun up? And it's a hard problem that people deal with today.
For sure. It's a huge challenge. But what we're doing is leveraging things like certificates is the easy part, but we're looking at links from other machines. We're looking at pieces of content within some of the services that you can communicate with. In some cases, and on some services and IaaS solutions, you can actually look at usernames that are related to these assets, which is an extremely powerful tool to understand, hey, I found this one server on AWS. This service is exposing this string that is strongly related to this company. This whole IP range or bunch of assets are owned by this user. And then you find these other strings or certificates or logos that are, again, strongly connected to this company. And that ties you with this other server or a subsidiary, for example.
Right.
That's awesome. That's more exhaustive than, my initial example. I'm glad you dug into all of those details, because most organizations, I should say, don't even do the first example where they're basically looking at all their IP ranges and looking at all their domains and subdomains and trying to see what's out there. That's like step 0.
Right.
What we
That's
just
totally
described,
true. Yes.
Right? And then, but building on that, you can find my artifacts and bits of infrastructure scattered across the internet.
Yeah, that is totally true. Most companies only understand, we have these 5 IP ranges while they actually have 10 IP ranges, and they're not even thinking or really don't have the resources to look at these subsidiaries and partners' assets, where, by the way, one of the biggest problems today is that the security rating solutions don't tell you how Salesforce affects your security posture. You get this number, but they don't tell you, here are the couple of instances where you have data, and one of which is completely exposed or exploitable. That's what you really want to know if you're a security team.
Now,
So
Rob,
what's that
I'm
relationship,
sorry.
right?
I was just going to say, for our audience, you mentioned images, right? And how if you had our company logo, for our audience, I wanted Rob to describe that you can basically fingerprint that image usage. There was a website that I use, TinEye is one of them, but I'm sure you've really built something much more.
So TinEye was amazing 10 years ago, around 10 years ago. Now you have even more impressive open source technologies, and not only. And visuals is one element that helps us both to discover assets, but also understand their business context. For example, say you're the CISO or CIO, and you want to understand, where are my payment mechanisms? Are they exposed? And what kind of financial data am I exposing through these kind of mechanisms? That's an important question. But if you're using a port scanner or a vulnerability scanner, all you're really looking at is tons of IPs, which don't tell you a lot. And say that you have this critical encryption problem. Thousands of your assets may have them, but you're really caring about these couple of assets that are, your payment mechanism and one of your main applications. And we're using visuals to even classify that. So, for example, if you have Visa and MasterCard logos, and then you have these few keywords like payment mechanisms, payment...
along with your logo.
Right.
That's awesome. I love that.
It's very straightforward, and if you were an attacker and you were there, it was so obvious you weren't even not noticing that you're thinking.
Right.
It's so obvious.
Now, there's also, and I remember doing this, and I don't remember all the details, there's in SSL, like a certificate chain that you can basically pull. Can you just describe that for like our
Sure.
C-level audience
Sure.
to understand, like through SSL and certificates, how you're able to identify infrastructure and artifacts?
Right. So SSL certificates are required for running a TLS, essentially. You cannot encrypt your communication with anyone if you're not using SSL certificates. And building these SSL certificates is usually under the IT department, which is usually unaware of the fact they're essentially building leads for attackers. So what they would do is use the same SSL certificate for 40 applications or 40 environments. And then if you find, when you will find the main application of this company, you may also discover these 39 other applications and environments. Now you have found potentially 39 new IP ranges, tons of keywords, more visuals. And if you're building a mathematical graph, you're also enforcing and enhancing the scores of everything else.
And that's because based on one SSL certificate, you can basically work backwards to all of the sites that are using that, and that information
or many of them.
And it's public knowledge, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's public because you have to put in when you apply for an SSL certificate, like the company name. There's a lot of data that goes in because you have to be validated before that certificate is issued. So part of the artifact of requesting the SSL certificate is giving a lot of this information, like company name, address, blah, 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 because they have to validate you.
And the fun part is that once you map, like we do, the 3.5 billion servers and devices connected to the internet, you have a database of all of these certificates, and now you can reverse search. And every time you find a relevant keyword or a company name that is related to this company, you can search and find all of these certificates related to them. Now you have found 1 million assets that are potentially relevant to that company, and based on that mathematical graph architecture, you're able to score how related they are to the company or whether they are owned by the company.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, yeah, so it's like a scoring thing. Like this server probably belongs to you because it has other artifacts that link to other servers that I know are.
Exactly. You have your logo there, these keywords, your SSL certificate, and so forth. You sometimes have just some of them, and then that's a maybe.
Right.
But when you're dealing with millions of assets and companies, Fortune 100 companies, yet not only, that's a huge challenge. And port scanning tools or scanners will only allow you to search for specific certificates, or if you look for this company name, you'll see 500 certificates. Now what? Right? You're not that does not solve any business problem. Again, the business problem, the way we see it, is understanding how attackers see my organization as a whole and understanding what's the path of least resistance. That's where you want to invest your energy in. And you have to do all that, unfortunately, maybe in a sense, for that goal.
And you've had this entire conversation without saying AI or machine learning.
Right.
That's true, yeah.
Well,
But
I have mentioned such elements.
And NLP, natural language processing, which is a big one, right?
Oh, okay. So
and
that's a technique. See, this is the way you're supposed to talk
I missed
about.
the NLP comment.
He said NLP, which is natural language processing, which is one of the techniques but that's the way you should describe it, not just throwing these terms out there. But,
it's not black magic, but again, you have also algorithms that find or provide or build scores of what kind of a machine is it based on exposed software, certain keywords, related links. For example, if you have the subdomain of DR, and then you have seen certain fingerprints or certain strings in the SSL certificate, you can tell the security team, this may be your disaster recovery environment. Because people think in patterns, and the IT team does so too. So based on these patterns, you can find many assets and also understand their business context without even talking to the security team.
Because it's AD-backup,
for example.
That's
and in 99% of the cases, you'll be correct.
And there are few packets that are actually sent to the organization's infrastructure. Right. I mean, probably some, but not a whole lot.
Right. So we do what we have. It's mostly what we call handshakes, and we don't exploit anything.
Right.
And one interesting fact is that we're distributing these scans over tens of thousands of dynamic IP addresses, and we also run these scans very slowly. And it allows us to bypass some CDNs and web application firewalls that block scanners and pen testers' open source tools that they run from their laptop.
Yep.
But it also allows us to get much more accurate results when you compare it with any other technology.
Oh, so are you making a copy of or extracting data from the internet and then storing that in a database and then querying the database?
Only unsensitive data, but we do regarding the business context of the assets. If we find, say, an API key or a credential, we don't save the credentials. We simply tag that asset as one that is exposing this kind of data. We don't want to save any
of that sensitive data.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that never happens.
And so you're constantly scanning the internet for change, because this stuff is changing constantly, right?
Right.
So these scans are constantly happening, populating the database. So as you see new assets for your customer. So if I'm a brand new customer, my data is probably already there.
Right. The raw data, yes.
Yeah.
We don't run the attack simulation on non-customers, but we do have raw data on every organization, and the proof of concept process is extremely straightforward. As people who spent years at intelligence agencies, we were not taught what sales and marketing are. So we simply onboard the customer, the security team, to the SaaS platform, and we tell them, here's your attack surface data. You told us you believe you have 50,000 exposed assets. It looks like you have 500,000 of them, or 300,000. And here are some specific examples that we would like to drill down into and see what you think about them. And when you see these mainframe exposing your financial data, or these 20 databases of which a couple are exposing this kind of data, it's pretty obvious that you had no visibility to what's going on.
And I've said this before, every organization should have this. I don't understand why you wouldn't, because it's such a low touch point, right? And it's all real data that's exposed.
Right.
And it's really accurate, low false positive, right? Like when that's my asset, right? There's no mistaking it, right?
Well, when I told my co-founder, Dima Potakin, that we should do this 2.5 years ago, he told me, Rob, there's no chance that nobody is doing it. But the fact is that as soon as you start running the discovery process and you try to automate it, very quickly, you'll see that you're hitting 90% false positives. If you don't have the right data model, if you don't build this as a mathematical graph, if you don't build these algorithms that take all of these strings and all of these technical fingerprints and others to understand what's actually related to the company and so forth. So that's a huge moat, or a challenge, in other words, to even get into this kind of a business.
I agree. Trying to do this yourself is really fun. Right, and you get certain pockets that are fun, and like you said, open source tools. But very quickly, your IP address may be banned, and now I've got to stand it up outside of my organization. I've got to rotate through IP addresses.
So you use Lambda,
Lambda or API gateway, right? But I would rather have my security team focused on protecting my assets and leave this heavy lifting to folks like you, and just provide me with the data. I want my team focused on closing down all of these exposures, not building out entire sets of infrastructure to do this.
And especially if you build these kind of technologies as tools and not as platforms that solve business problems, you end up using 15 different tools. You'll spend millions of dollars, and you'll have 15 threat hunters playing with all of these tools.
And more attack surface.
Right. That's true. We're seeing even deception solutions and SIEM solutions and others being the path of least resistance of certain companies, which,
That's awesome.
That's great.
So if people want to learn more, sorry, were you ready to say?
I was going to say, that's what I was going to say.
Oh, okay, good.
We're in sync. So if anybody wants to learn more, they can email you at contact@scicognito.com. And I'm assuming you can set them up for a proof of concept or something.
Of course, we're very happy to do that with any interested customer.
It's so, like, we talk about the time to value. it's probably like minutes in your case, right?
In
'Cause
many
you have
cases,
the data. You're
yes,
just-
20 minutes into the first meeting, even if we do it via Zoom, which we do in many cases with smaller customers, you're seeing true value, and you can easily compare what you're seeing with what these scanners or pen testers have
Right.
done
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah, I think the value's instantaneous. As soon as you put in your company stuff, because all the raw data is there, the ability to contextualize it, visualize it very quickly, time to value has got to be great with this kind of solution.
Yep.
Thank you, Rob, for joining us on
Thank you,
this
guys. It
Thursday.
was a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. We're going to take a quick break and then have our second interview with Jine and Budge from Forrester.